You love her voice, you love her looks. What Melissa loves are comic books. Hi, and welcome back. It's the middle of the night. It seems this is the only time I have to make videos now. Busy life, busy life. But, anyways, the 1930s are still rolling on, and we've got to cover more of it. So, let's talk about famous funnies. We haven't talked about that in ages, right? So, what do my notes say about that? Well, I've been talking a lot about Dell. We're checking in now on Eastern Color Printing, the first successful comic book publishers. While other publishers were testing the waters of how many titles they could afford to publish a month, Eastern Color was content with just their one title, Famous Funnies. And when they lost licenses to some comic strips, like to Dell or Detective Comics, it just seemed to roll off their back and they replaced them with new strips. This rotation of strips made the Famous Funnies of 1938 look quite different from the Famous Funnies of 1934 when the first issue came out. Gone is Tunerville Folks, the Bungle Family, Tailspin Tommy, Dixie Dugan, Mutton Jeff, Pam, Simple Dill, Smatter Pop, and Ben Webster, some of which I've talked about already or will talk about someday, while others are already vanished from comic books and never will get further attention here. Unlike some other comic books I've covered lately, instead of the covers being monopolized by specific characters featured inside, Feature Funnies was good about rotating through characters, so many of them got cover appearances. Through the remainder of 1938, only the dog Napoleon and characters from Okey Dokes appeared twice. I will get to Okey Dokes someday, not today. Of the original features, Somebody's Stenog, Hairbreadth Harry, Nipper, Connie, and the educational filler Highlights of History are still around in Famous Funnies. But I'm not going to focus on any of those in this episode. For the remainder of this episode, I want to talk about two other strips that already debuted in Famous Funnies between 34 and 38, but I never got to them before, and I feel that it was remiss of me to do so. And these are Scorchy Smith and Adventures of Patsy. I had to step away and get Jasper up here because he wanted to be on my lap, so I'm going to have a special guest star for the rest of this episode. All right, where did I leave off before Jasper wanted up on my lap? Scorchy Smith had started in newspapers in 1930, but debuted in Famous Funnies in issue 25 back in 1936. One of the interesting things about Scorchy Smith is that none of the strips by its original creator, John Terry, have ever been reprinted in comic books. Terry, the brother of Paul Terry, who founded Terry Toons, and we'll talk about those characters someday, dropped out of doing Scorchy Smith in 1933 over health issues and turned the strip over to Noel Sickles. Sickles aped Terry's style for a time before allowing his own art style to show in the strip, and that's where Famous Funnies decided to start reprinting, from the late 1934 strips on. Noel Sickles was a self-taught artist from Ohio who, while working for the Ohio State Journal, shared a studio with soon-to-be comic strip legend Milt Caniff. When Caniff left for New York to work for Associated Press, Sickles went with him. While Caniff, who soon creates Dickie Dare and then Terry and the Pirates, is the better known for today's comic strip historians, Caniff and Sickles saw each other as equal peers and learned a lot from each other. Scorchy Smith was an aviator hero, far from the first one, modeled loosely on Charles Lindbergh, but possibly also a little on Tailspin Tommy and the others that came before him, with more action and adventure and less of Lindbergh's politics, of course. The pages in issue 47 are compiled from the daily strips instead of Sunday pages, and they pick up in the middle of a storyline. Scorchy, originally from Montana, is in the city of Corumba, in the fictional country of Huaca. I think I'm pronouncing that right. In South America, which is suffering a political revolution. Scorchy and his company, he has 5 men working for him, but only Spike is ever referred to by name, were hired to fly warplanes, not to end the revolution, and not by the US government, but by a private company, to protect a big American company's shipping interests in Huaca. This wouldn't be very PC today. But Scorchy isn't interested in being neutral, particularly when the opposition general, Maddox, has already stolen one of Scorchy's planes and used it to bomb the city. Scorchy has to ferret out who the spies are in the Huacan government who made sure Maddox's plane wasn't shot down, but first he figures out who is spying on Trolling Limited, the company that hired him. This proves easy when he is introduced to a dancer that has seduced one of Scorchy's liaisons to the company. The dancer turns out to be the daughter of the opposition leader, Armara, and Scorchy uses her to get to Armara and capture him. A mob assembles. I can't move my notes very well with the dog pinning my arm down. A mob assembles after they see Scorchy leading Armara into the palace in Karumba, and then I'm not sure what happens. I'm not missing access to an issue here, but it seems a couple crucial pages were not reprinted. What I do know is that, when confronted with Armara, the head of the War Department, General Tequila, and yes, some of the naming conventions here are very unfortunate, is revealed to be the inside spy who was supplying information to Armara. In fact, it may be that Tequila was actually the leader all along, because for some reason, Scorchy lets Armara and his daughter get away when they promise to leave the country. In fact, he even helps them escape to America, which seems pretty weird given his involvement in war crimes. General Maddox, who was apparently important in the story earlier, we learn near the very end has fled the country off panel. During the issues that I'm talking about here, Maddox is referred to but never even seen. He's so out of the story at this point. This was not Scorchy's best storyline, and I think you may have picked up on some of the plot points that didn't land for me. In Belgium, Hergé will tackle this material far better in 1945 with the Tintin story The Broken Ear. But I still have to give Sickle props for being ambitious. He told it first, and he told an ambitious, complex story juggling a lot of characters. Speaking of characters, most important for the strip, Scorchy gains a new supporting cast member. Armara had a bodyguard, a tough Dutchman named Himmelstas. When Scorchy saves Himmelstas from the mob at the capital, Himmelstas treats it as a life debt and pledges loyalty to Scorchy. After this adventure, Scorchy doesn't even jump into a new adventure right away. Instead, Sickles slows the action down, let us see some of his downtime, Scorchy's downtime, not Sickles' downtime. And during this time, he focuses more on letting us know Himmelstas, get to know the new character, and see how he plans to help pay off his life debt by helping Scorchy raise the funds that he needs to help him build his dream plane. Sickles won't stay on the book forever. In fact, his run lasts just 3 years before he moves on. In 1938, it's Sickles' stories being reprinted, but it is Bert Christman doing Scorchy Smith in newspapers. At this time, every issue of Famous Funnies includes a one-page pinup of a random character, and the Scorchy Smith one was done by Christman, not Sickles. The name Bert Christman will come up again later when I get to one of my favorite Golden Age superheroes. Adventures of Patsy debuted in Famous Funnies 4 issues later in number 29, and I've been neglectful in never talking about it until now because some would argue it contained the very first superhero in comic books, and I know you've heard this from me before. Although most everyone agrees that Superman was the first superhero in comic books, others will point out that there were certainly superhero-like characters in comic books before him. Prototypes, if you will. Well, we've already talked about Dr. Occult, Mandrake the Magician, and the Phantom as possible forerunners, and here's another one too. No, it's not Patsy. Patsy's just a little girl. It's her guardian, the Phantom Magician. He wears a mask that conceals his identity, and his magic spells act sort of like superpowers, but some of the tropes of the genre are definitely here. Mel Graff was 27 when he landed his first comic strip since his high school newspaper. Feeling confident he would be a success, he left Cleveland, Ohio for New York City, where Associated Press, the syndicate that had hired him, was located. And it was then in 1934 that Graff started creating The Adventures of Patsy. The Oz parallels were obvious from the start. Patsy was carried by a kite in a strong wind to the magical kingdom of Oz Bodkins. King Silhouette is sort of the reverse Wizard of Oz. He really can work magic, and he was responsible for getting Patsy here instead of getting her home. She meets her first companion, Thimble, wanting to become better at something. In his case, ventriloquism. And Oz Bodkins has its share of witches, too. These other characters are immediately eclipsed when the heroic Phantom Magician first debuts in the strip. The name and the mask we've talked about already, and these remind us of the Mystery Man tradition from Pulp Fiction. His magic powers are quite different than the Mandrake model, more rooted in folklore. And I need my arm, Jasper. Excuse me. And his relation to Patsy, serving as an adult mentor figure going on her adventures with her, follows the model of Dickie Dare established 2 years earlier. But all this lasted for all of 28 pages of compiled daily strips. At that point, Patsy, Thimble, and the Phantom Magician return to the real world, and the strip immediately becomes boring. I'm being a little facetious. It might have still had its fans because the strip remained in papers for the next 20 years, finally ending in 1955. Magic doesn't work in the real world, of course, so the Phantom Magician is just an ordinary man now and takes the name Phil Cardigan while pretending to be Patsy's uncle. Thimble was either human all along or just looks human enough to pass for one, and no reference is ever made to their adventures in Odd Spodkins or the existence of magic, again, as if it had been retconned out of existence. Which maybe it was. We can be thankful that, unlike many other comic strip reprints, this one began in comic strips from the very beginning instead of mid-adventure later on, in which case no one today might have even have known that these magical adventures ever happened. By the time of the strips reprinted in May 1938, the first post-return adventure of the Ghost Train is just wrapping up. There was no real ghost train. It was all a scheme by a racketeer called Catfish Betts, who was sabotaging a train company. There are a couple pages of downtime activity where Patsy's friend Sue is hit by a car, and at death's door, and Cardigan is being recruited by the FBI at the president's personal request. None of which I may ever get to see resolved in the comic books because issue 49 is not available online. And that wraps up the downtime installments. By issue 50, Cardigan has been recruited to solve a mystery up in Canada. A rich man who owns timberland up there has sent 2 field men there, and one was shot dead and the other was driven mad. By the end of 1938, we know the culprit is a mad hermit squatting on the land who first captures Cardigan and tries to drive him mad with torture, the way he did one of those field men, and then traps Patsy and Ginny, the landowner's daughter, in a cabin with a hungry mountain lion. I'm not sure where Thimble is at this point, and it's possible that he's dropped out of the strip. I haven't really looked into that yet. And I'll grant you, this is a pretty good cliffhanger. Mel Graff would not stay on the adventures of Patsy forever either. He stuck around for 6 years before passing it on. At some point, probably 1936, Noel Sickles was art assisting anonymously on this strip, proving perhaps what a small world comic strips belong to. Noel Sickles will soon quit comic strips and spend the rest of his career in magazine illustration, while Mel Graff will go on to even more success with a strip called Secret Agent X9. Right now, in 1938, both of these strips, while significant and worth talking about today, only rated 2 pages each in every episode of Famous Funnies. Okie dokes gets 4. Again, I'll come to that. But I'm done for today. I'm going to put Jasper down soon because he's making my leg fall asleep. And I hope to see you next time. Bye, everybody. Oh, and Jasper says bye too.